Good evening. It is really good to be here. And it's especially good to be here right now because in my work, I'm on the road about 70% of the time, and it's a heavy time in the nation. And so often when I'm going places, the energy is angry or frustrated. Folks don't really see a path forward. And when I came in the lobby, that's not what I felt here. And I was really excited to be here. As I heard the conversations, as I've started hearing people talk about new partnerships, new relationships, new ways of being. But I was most surprised by the comprehensiveness of what you've taken on. And I can tell you, having started a lot of efforts, what you've done in 3 years is quite transformative. And sometimes when you're in it, you don't know that. And so I wanted to applaud what you've done, because often it takes people 3 years to stop fighting and just start talking to each other. Serious. And it doesn't matter how much money is on the table. There's a lot in our communities that gets in the way of getting results. And so, but before I get into the conversation, I really wanted to take a moment, because often we don't do this for each other. And I just really wanted to just say, Monroe, thank you. Yeah. But I also want to say thank you because we started our careers in Kansas City and have gone different ways, but always stayed connected. But I've never told you this, but I come out of poverty, and sometimes when you're trying to make it, you get to those moments where you're like, I don't know if I can do this next thing. I don't know if I've got it. But what I can honestly tell you, Monroe has always been one of those standards that I've looked to. The intellectual rigor, the ability not just to be smart, but know how to get things done, his ability to navigate the world, it's always been a North Star for me. And so I've never said that to you, brother, but I just wanted you to know I've watched you for a long time. And you've given me a lot of motivation to keep going in those moments where I thought, I don't know if I should apply for that job or this and that, but I'm here in many ways because of watching your example, so thank you. So what I want to share with you tonight is really what I've learned doing this work. I'm not going to tell you what to do because the adaptive challenge is for you to figure that out. But there is some things that I've learned that I'm seeing pretty consistently around the country. And so I want to share a little bit of that and then leave some time for questions. The first is the thing that I heard that was most exciting to me when I came in here, that this is not a program. We are not going to program our way out of solving the mobility problem in America. And that doesn't mean programs aren't needed, folks. But something more is needed. It is actually radical imagination. Radical imagination to actually believe and commit to ensuring that everyone in this community can succeed and prosper and reach their full potential. That doesn't just have to be a set of words. That can actually be reality. We built this nation with radical imagination. And somewhere along the way, we've stopped dreaming. We act like we can't do great stuff when it comes to the social sector anymore. And it's certainly not because those of us in it don't have radical imagination. That's not it. But often we run into folks who don't believe us when we dream big, don't want to capitalize us when we dream big. And I'm often frustrated that folks will have the audacity to look at numbers and prop their mouths to talk about results when the commitment in their heart is so feckless. What's the point? You know it's bad. You can have 1,000 more consultants come here and do 1,000 more reports, give you 1,000 more scatter plots, and you know what it's going to say? It's bad. So save your money. The answer is not going to be found in that data. The answer is found in the data that you're using to continuously improve. That's where an answer is found in data. Everything else is work avoidance. Everything else is work avoidance because you get intoxicated with the latest new researcher. You get intoxicated with the latest new framework. You get intoxicated by the new conversation going on nationally. And you can't even call your kids out by name. You can't even call your kids out by name. How are you going to change mobility if you can't call the kids out by name? that 80% represents real lives. And so one of the things that I've learned is, in many cases, we've got to shift where the capital is being deployed. I guarantee you can hire 1,000 more researchers, it won't change those numbers. The work has to be on the ground, in homes, in hospitals, in schools. And so in many cases, you've got to radically redesign the ecosystem to get the results that you want, because the system that's in place will not deliver it. And that's tough. And so what I'm asking you to think about first of all is, do you have the audacity to exercise radical imagination on this journey? And then the commitment day in and day out to see it through. Because sometimes we often wish, I just wish those numbers would go up tomorrow. We put $5 million in that, and we act like that's a lot of money. But here's what I can tell you about the amount of money. It is a lot of money, so I don't want to make light of that. I know what the cost is of oppression, and it is far more substantive. If you looked at what the nonprofit spends and what folks are spending right now to defeat school bond measures, the way transportation systems are being deployed in communities to deny folks the vote, all these types of things that are going on simultaneously that actually result in restricting the mobility rate, our dollars don't even come close to it. And I'm sharing this with you because if you want to talk about a social problem, you have to get it in context. And what I'm asking you to think about doing after you have the radical imagination that I see in this room and the commitment to do this work is to not project all of your hopes and aspirations on one sector and ask them to do all the work, when that sector isn't the one designing a system that is oppressive by nature. And I'll give you a really good example of that. I was in a city a few weeks ago, and they were talking about being really proud that they had been spending money to get people's credit scores up, getting them banked, they're getting access to buying homes and everything, but they were frustrated that their numbers weren't moving. And I just asked them to stop for a moment. And I said, you know what, I'm gonna waste your time today, so let's just not have this meeting. What I want you to do is I want you to go into your community, and I want you to tell me what you see in terms of the system of oppression. Because when I say that word, oftentimes people will roll their eyes and be like, there he goes. But I said, you know what, we can't actually have a strategy conversation until you actually have level set on the reality. And what they discovered was the thing that was hurting their results was not bad behavior by folks because they were just spending money that they didn't have and going into debt. It was actually that the municipality had made a decision that it would over-police in a particular neighborhood. And it would extract fines and fees to subsidize the loss of tax revenue to subsidize the municipality. Now, I might not have had a problem with that if they had chose to do it everywhere. But in the neighborhoods that I live in, they don't treat us that way. So they took the poorest communities that they know could never fight back and engage legal counsel, and they decided that over parking tickets, small court fees and things, these things would balloon up to a $50 ticket would end up being $1,000, $3,000. And then they would hire a beautiful ecosystem around it of collection agencies, et cetera. And so all the good work that was happening over here, like by folks like you in this room, was being wiped out by a municipality who simply chose to see a group of people as a source of revenue and not see their humanity. But they were a little smarter than that because they knew better than to treat everybody like that. And so I'm sharing that with you because in many ways in your community, as you start getting into these numbers, you will realize that there are some other things you gotta deal with. Third grade reading is absolutely the accelerant to mobility. And so it's absolutely right to focus on that. That is key. The evidence tells us that. And while you're focusing on it, the work for our generation is to hold all the other complexity. Stable housing, children having access to a primary care physician, having a college-going culture in the home. All of that complexity has to be held right now. And that's what makes the work even tougher for us. It would be easier if you were just talking about doing a program and calling it a day, but that's not what you're undertaking. You're actually talking about creating a community of opportunity. Now that I don't often hear a lot about. You're not just talking about third grade reading, you're using it as an opportunity to change the mobility number. That's impressive, folks. So many places I go, this will devolve into a conversation about where you sit on the political spectrum. I find that quite irrelevant right now. This is a results-based conversation. No matter where you sit on the political spectrum is irrelevant. The question is, what type of community do you want to build? That's the question. And if you don't want to do this work, then just stop asking for the numbers to change. There's easy ways to deal with it. But in this moment, what you have packaged is a powerful way for us to hold all of the complexity. Families must have a contribution to this work. Families must have a contribution, and we should be extracting that contribution first. We must have high-quality programs. And when I say high-quality programs, I'm talking about programs the type of you would put your money to it. You would use it for your kids and grandkids. I got fired in Kansas City for actually having the audacity to ask a group of civic leaders this question. Let's not debate quality. Because if it's really good, you would use it. And I had the audacity to not back down, and so the sanction was I got fired. And I'm telling you this because there's going to come moments in here where you're going to be in these tough moments where someone's going to be pushing. They're right, and you're going to deal with them. The sanction for me being right and not as politically savvy as I am now is I got fired. I'm still doing the work, though. I'm still here 20 years later doing the work, but I'm sharing that story with you because often we have another standard for those kids. Whether they're white, black, Asian, whatever they are. And our standard has to be the same if we're going to have the right community of opportunity. And that's what I'm excited about here. You're talking about the right thing, a community of opportunity. You're focused on the right thing, mobility rates changing. And you've picked one of the prime accelerants of how to get there, and now you're building the adaptive muscle to learn how to do it. And here's what I'll tell you about learning how to do it. It gets tough and it is unsexy work. And everybody will want to go to the sexy thing, and you must resist that urge. Because this work is not sexy. Getting partners to think about behaving and reorganizing and letting go of stuff that they've done for years, but it doesn't work. Getting them to let go of it. It's going to be tough. Shifting resources from folks who you've had relationships for many years. It's going to be tough. Taking on school systems that are inert is going to be tough. Wrapping your arms around those principals who are trying to get some air cover so that they can do this work, or school board members who are trying to provide the capacity to do this work, it's going to be tough. Having the commitment to ignite healthy conflict for many of you will be the hardest thing you have to do. But what I can tell you is this. If you think you can do this work with no conflict, you might as well go home tonight. It doesn't mean that we have to be harmful, and it doesn't mean that we have to be disrespectful. But quite frankly, our systems are designed to give us exactly the results that they're giving us. So if you want a new possibility, you've got to make it happen. And I'm sharing that because oftentimes we want the success without the pain. And what I'm asking you to accept is, are you willing to accept some loss? Loss that sometimes you may have to step back so others in community can lead on this. Loss because sometimes you're going to have to let other voices speak. Loss because sometimes you may have been the third grade reading guru and now the community folks have it. The adaptive challenge for our work is for us to be able to step into that space of loss and find a new way to contribute. That's what I'm learning every day. And I'm learning it because I'm holding on something that one of the most seminal leaders in the civil society sector said once. He says, you know, Michael, one of the most important things you can learn is to exercise non-jurisdictional leadership. That was John Gardner. And what he was basically saying is, no matter what you think, no matter what your title, you don't control anything. So you're only as good as the value that you bring. And what I'm asking you all to think about is, you're only as good as the value that you bring. And it's a powerful frame for me because it keeps me humble to know that when I'm doing my best work, I'm going to feel a little some kind of way. I'm going to feel some kind of way because folks ain't giving me what I feel is the respect I deserve. I'm going to feel that I'm not being able to use all my gifts the way I need to. That's the community process. That's what I'm talking about suffering loss. That I've got to be able to feel all those emotions and still stay engaged and awake in that moment and do my job, do my contribution. Another thing that I've learned is that if folks don't own a contribution, they should never come into this room. Because if you let people into this space who do not own a contribution, they will derail it. You've got plenty of indicators, so it's not a problem to own something. But if you don't let people own something, or you don't force them to, they will tell you to go read another book. They will tell you to go listen to a new tape. They will get you off on things that will become distracting. I'm telling you all this because this is a long journey, folks. It is a journey that is an exciting one. It is a journey that you're going to look back in 10, 15 years and you're going to be really proud of the work that you set in motion. But what I want you to think about most when it comes to community building right now, because I'm actually in this now as I think about the equity movement and my role in that movement. I'm actually at a place where I'm having to swallow my own medicine. I'm trying to build something that I probably won't get to live to see get done. And that is absolutely the right work to do. But when I'm setting it up right now, I'm actually having to think 20 years out. And that just runs counter to all my funders. And so I'm actually trying to have a conversation with funders like, look, I can do what you want me to do right now, and you know what? Nothing's going to change. We will be in a very transactional relationship. But I actually don't want to be in that relationship with you because I'll quit PolicyLink. But the transformative play is what the anger is about in this nation. Can we get it to work for everyone? No matter where people are sit, they're frustrated, they're hurting, they're wanting more inclusion. And we can create that. But what I'm asking you to think about is you got to get out of thinking that if I just 3 years, that's it. Think of this as infrastructure that you must build so that future generations can accelerate as they come onto it. That's what you're building. You're building the capacity to get over the politics and the institutional barriers and the interpersonal barriers that delay progress. You're modeling for the next generation a way of just accelerating them coming up, rolling up their sleeves and getting this work done when they come back from college or wherever they come back from, the military, wherever. You're building that infrastructure. And in the early days, it's going to be more expensive. So don't think there's a cost benefit right now that you can quantify that's going to be less, because it won't be. But if you do this work, over time it will get less expensive. The mobility rates will change. Third grade reading numbers will go up. And that's what I'm most excited about. Because in most places I go, they don't have the optimism that is embodied in this room. But what they also don't have is the rigor that what I've seen you design here. I've seen a lot of third grade reading programs because I've been a part of the campaign for third grade reading, so I've seen a lot of it. It's not as rigorous as this. You've put something quite powerful together that's grounded in the science. It's grounded in what we know about implementation science. And then it's backed by folks who want to make the investment to do this work. You have all the criteria for success. So as I close, so we can take some questions, I want you just to think about this. Do this work with the heart full of a commitment to want to help every child in this community, no matter where they reside. See the systems that are getting in the way of your results and take them on and transform them. Don't avoid the tough conversations that you've got to have in this community around race and class and gender and other intersections. Take them on when they get in the way of your work. And make the commitment to build the institutional and the personal and the community capacity so that this work will be enduring when you step off the stage. If you do this, you're going to create a society where everybody's going to prosper. When Ross Chetty comes back, he'll be blown away because your numbers will be leading the nation. You're doing the work for the nation. This is nation building. This is what it looks like when you are in it. And I don't know if you know, but I've been around now enough to keep seeing us cycle into these same conversations. They come and go in these 3 to 5 year spurts. Don't let this be another spurt. Stay steady on this work. and watch how this place leads the nation in showing us how our most vulnerable children will be standing on this stage like I'm privileged to do today. So thank you.
Facilitate questions.
All right.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
I have one rule in my professional career, and that is never to go after Michael McAfee. So I think you can see why. So Michael has graciously agreed to answer some questions. So we've got about 10 minutes for questions. So I see a hand back there. Go up front. All right.
With all the xenophobia in the world right now, and especially in our country, is there a way that you would, or an explanation or even kind of suggestion you would give to people that would help maybe resolve that problem right now, in your opinion?
With all the xenophobia in the world, is there something that I would recommend about how to solve it? I'm at a place right now, honestly, where if I'm not in a results-based conversation, I don't have much to solve. I think we're at a moment in this nation where everybody just needs to be quiet for a moment. I mean, seriously. Because because it's almost like you get popular because you can have a Twitter battle. Or you can say something provocative. That's not the work. That's why I said I want to only engage when we're talking about work. The way you solve this problem is that I've got to be as comfortable talking in Berea, Kentucky as I am Chicago, or the Delta of Mississippi as I am Miami, Florida. I've got to care about everybody's child just as much, the kid in the suburb as the kid in the rural area as the kid in the urban area. And part of the problem about holding all the complexity is we've not been able to do that effectively. So absolutely people feel left out because they have been. And absolutely people feel angry because we have designed systems to target folks and exclude opportunity from them. And when you allow that to happen, it's easy for people to fill that void with a negative narrative and exploit it. So what I'm discovering is, when I go to places where I would think that, when I go to places where when I was a little boy, I used to watch my dad put the pistol under the seat and drive us to the South. When I go there now, one, I don't have to do that. At least I think I don't have to do it. But two, when I show up to do the work, no matter what people may be holding a point of view of me about, it goes away. I don't need you to like me. I don't need you to actually, you can hold whatever opinion, as long as you be respectful of me, I'm gonna work with you. And I think when we can get to that place where we can hold the focus on the result in the center, that will solve a lot of these problems. So that's what I'm seeing as a breakthrough. And the last thing I'll say is this around this, and this goes to reaching some of the toughest things when your numbers get really tough and you get to those last mile of numbers to get. You cannot be afraid to go into your communities, folks. You can't be afraid of your people. You can't be afraid of your people. That's what's causing all this divisiveness, is that we are afraid of our people. So for me, that's why I'm keeping my advice focused on how I'm choosing to show up. And your job is to figure out how it would work for you. But when I do that, keep the results at the center, hold the interests of everybody's family, I don't end up having to deal with that.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yes, right here.
Dr. Harris has written a book, The Deepest Well, and talks about toxic stress in families and,
Yes.
and children, and the fact that once they are involved or they have toxic stress in their family, in their lives, it's really difficult to turn that around. In fact, it's mostly impossible. How do you deal with families and children that have unbelievable experiences in their families? How do you deal with that?
Sure. So the issue of toxic stress is a powerful new development in science. I would also connect that work to the epigenetic work that's going on that actually shows that our structures of oppression actually have a physiological and a genetic effect. It changes the nature of our genes. We didn't know that before. But this is important. This is what I mean by really actually understanding the context of what's going on if you want to change those numbers. Now, the beauty is Dr. Jack Shankoff will tell us in his research But you still have till about 20, 25 before the brain is fully set. So even though toxic stress is very real and it's changing the brain, it's doing things to our DNA, it all is not lost. You still got to the 20s before it gets fully baked in. That's a long horizon. But your point about toxic stress is one of why I brought in the community context. I was at a place that was it was about personal responsibility. And I actually don't have a problem with personal responsibility. I come out of the Midwest, so I don't sit on these political spectrums like people would expect me to sit. That's why I talk about results, because that's what I care about. And I asked them this fundamental question. If you designed a nation to be oppressive and you were results-based and did it really well, how long would it take to change that? There's no evidence, because we haven't done that research, folks. But that's actually what we're up against. We've designed a nation that has really beat the hell out of some folks intentionally, all of us of all races. And we've been cleaning that up over the years. But we don't have the answer. And that's why I said it's a long journey. You're actually building the evidence that we need to know what it takes. How do you go into a place and try to improve reading scores when the home ain't right? It starts by having those learning spaces in the home that you're talking about building. But what I'm also asking you to think about is do not underestimate the importance of what you're going to learn about that to contribute to the body of knowledge around toxic stress and how do you have breakthroughs programmatically or from an intervention perspective, because we don't fully know the answers yet. This is why the work that you're doing is so important, because that's how we're going to find out what really works. And that's why I said you got to be willing to start stuff and then let it go if it doesn't work. Because we're learning so much new stuff that the science is telling us that a lot about what we thought worked doesn't. And we're one of the few sectors that will keep doing things for 20 years even though we know it's wrong. Everybody else will have imagined an entire new aerospace system, a new auto industry, and we're still stuck on a charity mindset.
All right, thank you. There's a question all the way in the back.
Hi, I just, more a comment than a question. You talked about radical imagination, and I've never heard that before, and I loved that idea. Then you talked about stepping into loss, and as I think about like our biggest barriers to trying to come together as a community for everyone's benefit, it seems like the fear you talked about is experienced by polar opposites, those in like the most desperate of situations, those toxic stress that are hopeless and have no reason to try to, there's no hope in their lives. And those at the other end who are so threatened by any kind of personal loss that they're going to have to give up for the benefit of the community as a whole. And so, I think you're preaching to the choir here, but it's really difficult for, to try to convince others in those two different extremes how important it is to come together as a community. Can you give any kind of advice?
Yeah, you all have to be the ones who hold steady in your behavior. This is why the story that I told about watching Monroe's example is important. I've never found in community, coming from communities that I come from, I've never found hope is not there. If you want to know some of the most hustling, innovative folks who can survive on $2 a month, I can take you to some places, and you'd be surprised. So, hope is not the problem. People just don't know that there is another way that people have learned to live. My family lived off of poke salad and fishing and hunting. And our freezer was always stocked. Now, some folks would have said we didn't have no hope. But I was in poverty as a kid and had a great time. Because I was outside playing with my BB gun all day, but I didn't know any better. But that's why when I got older, Monroe's example of intellectual rigor and stuff was so important. Because that was at that same time where I was starting to get serious about my own academics, etc. So here's what I would recommend. Everybody has to do their work, and this is really real in the space right now. Because people of color are showing up and saying, you know what, I'm tired of kind of having to put my shoulder down a little bit and kind of not be in my full presence to make other people feel comfortable. I can't tell you how many times as I've tried to run this gauntlet to get here, people would say, Michael, as a black man that's tall, be careful of your space. Don't talk too loud. God help you if you get passionate about something. I don't choose to be in that straitjacket anymore because that has health effects. So the first thing I have to say is I've got to do my own work. I'm going to give you an example of how I'm doing that. When I say you all have to do your work, I was someplace where a foundation executive said, you know, I see all these people of color coming to the space. I guess there's no place for a white man anymore. And he didn't say that negatively. He was saying it to me as a colleague that he really felt it. And I thought it was great that he could be that honest. But I wanted to say, why do you feel that way? Because you're sitting on top of all this capital. No one's asking you to go anywhere right now. The world is not that limitless. But he needs to start doing that journey, so we engaged in that work. Now, the last thing I'll say here is this. So what I'm asking you all to do is to think about your work. That's why I asked you to think about the loss that you feel and focus on, is it real or what's going on that you got to work with? About 3 years ago, I was really getting triggered around the Michael Brown shooting, may have been longer. And when white men would talk to me, I would get really triggered because it was like when I share my experience, it would get disregarded. And so I was starting to shut down. I can't do my job and shut down on folks who haven't done anything to me. So I happened to be hiking with a gentleman who is white, and he was telling me about he started this group called White Men, Black Men in college. I said, man, maybe we should try to do that here in Oakland because I'm not showing up right. So we started this group, and the first it was such a cultural. You never go to a bar with a group of brothers with some pink bunny rabbits to make like an example of a story you're trying to tell. I use all my political capital to get some elected officials and some other folks that I know to come to this bar to join me on this journey. And my colleague that shows up, he shows up in his most authentic self, and he pulls out this, we're all having a couple beers, and he pulls out these bunny rabbits. It was around Easter, and he wanted to make an example, try to make some analogy about what this group was going to be. And at the moment he started pulling them out, I could see the brothers run away. And they never came back. And I went home to my wife, and I was mad, and I was cursing. She's like, no, just hang in there. Just do it. I got a few more brothers to stay with me. And a few months in, we started having really deep conversations. And one of the guys said to me, he says, you know, nothing's ever happened to me, but I do find myself being afraid of black guys. Now, in our masculinity culture, that is a big statement to make. And I was able to say back, so how do you think that impacts your work as a city planner in the city of San Francisco? That's the real conversation we got to have, folks. For you to be afraid of me on site, and then not to want to think about then how that plays out in your system. Think about what that means in school systems, in police systems. And we don't have to hold it as a crutch, but we've got to start talking to each other that way, where he can say that without me beating him up, and he can then hear me and we can go deeper. That's what I mean about nation building right now, folks. You all are on a journey where in this work you're doing around third grade reading, keep it always centered on the results. These types of conversations are going to come up. And the gift that you can give to each other is to not judge, but hold with the conversation and get to the other side. And when it gets tough, find a thing to do your work like I had to do there.
Can we give another round of applause to Michael McAfee? Thank you.
Thank you.